All right, how's it going, my magnificent sons of bitches? And I decided I was going to go ahead and do this series and talk a little bit about really what I believe in and how we got here as a humanity. Um, if you see the direction that the government is going and how everything is going right now as far as it pertains to humanity, and where this is eventually going. So I figured the best place to start is from the beginning. So, with that being said, I had to start. There's nowhere else to start. I'm going to go ahead and give you two options that you would probably, for consideration. It's going to determine whether you're going to go ahead and invest in this series and try to figure out what's going on with humanity and where humanity goes from here and how we're going to get there and whatnot. Or do you want to go ahead and, hold your and close your eyes and whatnot? And so there's no other way but to sit there and go through the process of academia, which is basically the Big Bang and evolution, and then go through the Christian interpretation. And I'm going to let you know which one I preferably believe in. And ultimately, from here, I'm going to go ahead and pivot into the different aspects from the Bible, and then inflate that, come back with history later on in this series. But I can't really go ahead and get that off the ground until we go ahead and address the elephant in the room, and that's the fact that the Big Bang and evolution is a complete and utter myth that's taught in institutions. And I'm going to go ahead and go through that, and I'm going to show you why I believe in that. So, without, any more hesitations, here we go. All right, as we can see here, this is supposedly the process for the Big Bang. Now, as we can tell, with the flaw in some of the logic here in the Big Bang Theory is that a lot of these processes are just absolutely fucking insane to have happened. A lot of it doesn't make any sense. Like, a lot of the questions that I got is, okay, you've got this highly built up, condensed dot of energy, I guess, that just pretty much contains everything. And where was this hanging out at the time? Was there dark space? Is that black matter? There's a lot of holes that are actually not filled in whenever it comes to the Big Bang. And considering that, the source of the Big Bang was actually a Catholic priest, to be honest with you, a lot of it just really doesn't make a lot of sense. You go from having a lot of these processes, probably millions and millions and millions of processes, happen in under a second. And then, a lot of the processes happen within 3 minutes. You got inflation, and then you got the end of inflation. You've got, a lot of different processes that happen within 3 minutes. And then for like 300,000 years, there's nothing. It's like a dark age. It's just building up to a universe. And all of a sudden, all the galaxies and the universe, essentially as you know it, kind of comes into play after about like 200, 300 million years. It's starting to form until what you get today. Supposedly, this happened about 13 billion years ago. Unfortunately, for those who practice in science, I doubt anybody's going to argue this too much, is that this process would have had to taken way, 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 way longer than what the science pretends that it is. So my real question is why would we teach this as any kind of fact-based science? Why would we go ahead and speculate? Why can't you have intelligent design as an alternative to this in the public school system? And intelligent design doesn't mean any kind of specific ideology. It just means that you believe in an ultimate creator. So let's go ahead and go through this whole process and try to figure out what it sounds more reasonable to you whenever we're trying to figure out what is going on with this evolutionary theory, because you can't really have evolution until you have a universe. And for that to happen, we have to basically revisit Genesis altogether. So I'm going to ask, in this video that I'm doing, which one sounds more rational? Is this Big Bang with all these processes. And let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit. I mean, these are, you can't even measure this shit that happened, you know, through these processes. Yeah, you know, thousands of millions of years and whatnot. There's no rational reason that science has came up with this other than that it's science fiction. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce some other things that I have an issue with, and legitimately believing in this process. And this is one of the reasons why I think ultimately we need to go ahead and revisit what we're teaching in our public education system. So I'm taking this source straight from the internet. It was just the best answer given. But this is a general fact. Whenever you're actually looking into this stuff, this is generally, commonplace here. A statistical impossibility is a probability that is so low as to not be worthy of mentioning. Sometimes it is quoted as 10 to the negative 50th power, although the cutoff is inherently arbitrary. Although not truly impossible, the probability is low enough so as not to bear mention in a rational or reasonable argument. So, whenever we're looking at the Big Bang Theory and the universe systematically set up as it is right now, a systematic universe specifically designed for life to exist, what would you go ahead and think that the odds or the probability is, in a, you know, say, uh, if you were going to go ahead and put it into a statistical numbers, if 1 is greater than 10 to the 50th power, then what do you think that the statistical, anomaly of coming up with a systematic universe actually is? The odds of coming up with a statistical number based on Walter Primrose for coming up with this systematic universe perfectly capable of being able to, provide the elements. This isn't even getting to life. This is just providing our galaxy or, anything like that. The statistical probability of we already know that it's a statistical impossibility, anything that is 1 greater than 10 to the 50th power. The statistical probability or possibility of a systematic universe basically just by chance coming out of nothingness. Well, this is the number right here. And if that isn't insane, right, that's 1 to 10 with a 1 with 120 fucking zeros behind it. That's the probability of a systematic universe. This isn't giving you life. This is just getting the universe set up to be able to sustain life, to be capable of sustaining life. However, the people in academia said that this process happened in some 13 billion years, with Earth only being 4 billion years old. So let's go ahead and go into this process because we haven't even gotten to the sun, the earth, the moon, the stars, which are systematically placed and designed to go ahead and sustain life. Let's go ahead and look at these processes and compare it and see if it's really, really reasonable to sit here and go along with this coherent delusion that a lot of people like to discuss and say, well, you believe in creation. You believe God created the world in 7 days. Or, he created it in 6 days and on the 7th he rested. But, you get what I'm saying. Is that's such a far-fetched idea by the people over there in the academia and the people coming out of these institutions who should probably be institutionalized whenever they go ahead and pay lip service to this is how it all began. So let's go ahead and look at the whole process of it. So I'll go ahead and say, okay, we'll give you the Big Bang. All right. And it went through all the hyperinflation and, all of the processes that it needed to do to go ahead and create these galaxies and stars and whatnot. But let's go ahead and take a deeper dive into all of these processes of, you know, where we're at today and the lunacy behind it. So, the first thing we need to get to is the fucking sun, right? Because we have to have the sun in order to have life on the earth, right? It has to exist at some point in time. Now, no time in my life have I ever seen gases collapse on each other. Actually, gases tend to expand. That's the whole point of explosions and shit, is that gases tend to expand, particularly when they're under certain pressures or heat. And but in this case, we're going to have to sit there and say that a group of these gases somehow come together and essentially formed the sun. And like nowhere have we ever seen this. They claim they have seen this, but their word is as good as their bond, which isn't that great at all. Uh so, 93 million miles away, just conveniently somehow, not understanding exactly how this actually happened, these gases kind of collapsed to form our sun, which is our closest, nearest star, according to those people that are in academia. Now, somewhere, because understand one thing, that this whole damn universe is nothing but utter chaos of celestial bodies colliding into each other randomly with no method or madness whatsoever. you know uh you still got to get our stationary planet that is firmly in the position where the sun provides light to it for the plants to grow, the moon at night that affects the tides, and all of the accommodations that we have on this fucking planet. You've still got to get the planet from here. So now you're looking at a chance of getting a universe that is mathematically impossible from the get go. Getting to the universe is mathematically impossible. Just existence in and of itself, by pure chance, is mathematically impossible. Means we really shouldn't be here. I already showed you the number. We already know that it's mathematically impossible trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of times over. And, it's just not even up for fucking debate. But now, you know, somehow, which would probably be even more impossible, you have a bunch of gases collapsing on each other, forming the sun, which is our star, the light bearing star that provides life to this planet. Um, and now you got to go ahead and get these boulders and these kinds to form a planet. So somewhere in the universe, nobody explains exactly how this started to happen. I mean, you got your black matter and all of your theories and shit that have never been proven, and they put very little effort into proving any of their theories. They don't have to. They're the new, how do you say it? They're the new bishops of today. They're the new aristocrats and whatnot. They don't have to put anything. They're just, given this award in academia, and supposedly that makes them more certified to have an opinion than you do. However, all of a sudden you get this force called gravity, and it draws in all of these cosmic meteorites into one centralized location to go ahead and come together and start to form the basis structure of our Earth. How it gets perfectly round, nobody knows. They don't have to explain anything. They're in academia, they know more than you do. But whenever we're going through these processes and we're sitting there thinking about the general perception of the lunacy that is this concept of evolution, of how life began and how we were created, and the struggle that you have to go through to sit there and uh, really invest into saying that there isn't any God, is absolutely fucking lunacy to me. It's absolutely lunacy. So, but this is according to the science, is that somewhere gravity pulled these balls together. Now, whenever this started to happen, Earth's temperature is probably thousands and thousands of fucking degrees. It's too hostile for anything to really exist on. A closer, example is what they, claim that Venus is right now. Is that the environment's just too hostile at this point in time, and it wasn't capable of holding life. Hell, you couldn't get, you can't even get, much less, you're not going to get any water on this planet right now. Anything that would immediately come in contact with this planet would be incinerated at very, very, at point blank range. It would just be incinerated. So let's go. We have to get it to where it's livable, right? That makes sense. I mean, we have oxygen and trees and birds and stuff. So how did this all of a sudden come about? So the first thing that we got to get is the moon, right? We've got to get the moon in the sky somehow so we can go ahead and you know, pretend to go ahead and monitor the tides and stuff like that. It has, it has great celestial pull on our body. It basically keeps us, you know uh it definitely keeps our oceans and our currents and everything in line. It's more than just a floating satellite out there. It has a great effect on Earth, even though it's getting further away as we speak. So apparently, according to this, and this is a very, very hostile, they could sit there and tell you that, oh, it's just full of disasters and calamities, and it's, the Bible is full of all of these, disasters. But look at your own science. So somewhere along the lines, a planet crashes into Earth, which causes debris to fly out into the sky, and ultimately this debris over time starts to formulate, and they starts to formulate into a perfect fucking circle, by the way. Just, the right amount of distance from our sun to go ahead and have your eclipses and to have the magnetic pull that it does. All of a sudden, this dust just randomly forms into what we consider the moon right now. This is according to the science. This isn't according to me. All right, I don't believe in this shit, but this is according to the science. So, right now, with the numbers that I showed you for the, getting the universe started from the beginning, and for it to go through all the processes, some of these at, 10 minus 50 of a nanosecond or whatever the hell, they're processes that had to have happened instantaneously, almost as soon as the Big Bang happened, unnoticeable. uh then you have to get gases collapsed. You have to get the universes first, then you have to get gases to collapse to go ahead and form the sun. Then you have to go ahead and get these meteor rock fragments floating around aimlessly in space to go ahead and collapse on each other, to go ahead and form this perfectly shaped planet. And you still haven't even gotten to the water yet. For another planet to come by and collide with it, and just smash into it to create another perfectly formed heavenly object, just the right distance and just the right. What do you think the chances right now of it is? And this is the absolute lunacy that they teach in school, that this is fact. This is blind faith. There's no fact into this. This doesn't even make any fucking sense. So, but I'm wondering, you know, you're so skeptical, the skeptics are so skeptical of everything, but this is really how goofy your science is. You understand what I'm saying? So anyways, once we get this, we still haven't even gotten to the water, or any of the foundations, the structures that you need for life. So how did we get the water onto this planet anyways? Well, yeah, according to the scientist, these meteorites, these space rocks that were floating aimlessly in space, all of a sudden started to go ahead and crash to Earth carrying tiny crystals of water. That for about 20 million years. You see how hostile this environment is? You see how hostile the origin of this Earth has in the processes? The utter fucking insanity that has to be theorized to go along with the Earth being created over billions and billions of years, which would have taken much, much, much longer if you're going to be reasonable about that. But we can ultimately dismiss that it didn't happen at all. It was created. It was created by an intelligent designer, and these methods are absolutely lunacy. They're absolutely lunacy. But for 20 million years, supposedly these meteorites were bringing crystals of ice from space. Where that water came from, nobody knows. And then just dumping it here on the Earth to go ahead and cool the foundations of the planet and to go ahead and make it more livable and sustainable. It was far from where we're at right now. But, this is supposedly the process of what we had to go through to get to where we haven't, we haven't got to the Earth as we know it yet. This is just getting the water on there. So, mathematically, we could sit there and say that, you know, that this is probably bullshit, and why is this being taught in education? Why is it being taught in education? So now you need the ingredients for life. You know what I'm saying? Uh, you need a certain amount of proteins to go ahead and build DNA, but you need DNA to go ahead and manufacture the protein. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't make any sense at all that you can't really have one without the other. So this is the absolute lunacy that they believe in. Is that now the meteorites, because they always use the meteorites, that's the biggest fucking plot device in the scientific community. If they need something, a meteorite has to bring it from space. You see what I'm saying here? Is it has to be brought to this Earth from somewhere else, another fucking point. It has to be brung to Earth, and it has to be planted in on Earth. It wasn't here originally. And so this is the absolute lunacy that they teach your kids in school and whatnot. So these meteorites brought just the right amount of amino acids and the right amount of protein to go ahead and form a functional cell, according to the scientific community. So yeah, they stopped bringing they stopped bringing crystals of water in here, and then they started bringing in these. So it sounds more like some shit that you would hear on Star Wars or the MCU or DCEU. We can tell that this isn't science. This is science fiction. Understand that you need a certain amount of protein to go ahead and form the DNA strands. You need the DNA to go ahead and build the proteins, and this is just the basic building blocks for getting cellular structure. This is just the bare essentials, giving you the basics. And when we look at the process from what we've already had to go through from the Big Bang to get here, this is just astronomically just insane and impossible. So, this is the structure of a cell, and this is just to get to this structure. Whenever the little freaking people that sit there and say, oh, it's just a clump of cells, just remember this structure. All these pieces, this uh, nuclear envelope and the nucleus and the membranes and the all of these systems, they just work together. They depend on each other to form a fully functional cell. It's all symbiotic, which we're going to get into a little bit later into this video. But this is a very, very complex organism. Even though it's just a cell and you think it's simple, at the end of the day, it's really not. So the odds of getting a cell on a planet capable of sustaining that fucking cell is 1 to 10 to 39,997. All right, it's a little bit better than getting a systematic universe set up perfectly, just capable of sustaining life. But then once you get past that, then, this seems like relatively small. Unfortunately for the scientific community, this would be 10 to the 39,997 times that 10 to the one with 120 zeros behind it, you'd have to multiply those two numbers together just to get the chances to go ahead and get a cell in a planet, in a systematic universe, in the right environment, under the right conditions for it to even come close to evolving. And as soon as you get the cell, the first thing that it's going to have to overcome is the symbiotic relationships. You know what I'm saying? Trees produce oxygen. Humans breathe in oxygen, just like this bee right here, going ahead and pollinating this flower right here, and in return, the bee gets nectar for its hive and whatnot. These are called symbiotic relationships. So, I mean, if you got a cell that's functional and you know it can sustain itself, it's a fully functional cell. It's going to need assistance to survive. It's going to require a satisfactory environment just for it to even get close to coming into being able to evolve. So this is the first step that it would have to hurdle. Now, after all of that math, after all of those mathematical impossibilities that I've just showed you, you know, what are the chances of now somehow this tiny cell that shouldn't be here on a planet that shouldn't be here next to a star that shouldn't be here according to the science, in a universe or in a galaxy that shouldn't be here, in a universe that shouldn't exist. And then we're going to teach this as like some sort of scientific fact that this is just by coincidence. I think that that's going to be a hard pass for me to go ahead and invest in. And then I think I'm going to have to require these this to be stopped. You know, they're going to have to stop teaching this shit in academia. I'm sorry. Now, the law of biogenesis states that life can only come from life, which ultimately put the death knell in evolution and in Charles Darwin's theory from the get-go. Life can only come from life, and that new life forms are created through the reproduction of existing life forms. So it means that basically, life forms can only reproduce, according to their own kind. You know what I'm saying? You don't see that straight. So ultimately, after it gets past the symbiotic relationships, it has to go through a process called biogenesis, and this is where it struggles. You can't even get to the beginning from it because life doesn't produce from non-life. So now this is where the scientific community had to go off the goddamn rails to go ahead and keep their theory of their, but I mean, let's be real, that it's a market now at this point in time. It's not a science. You just market it. It's basically like Star Wars. It's science fiction, but you got to keep the market going because you have so much invested into it. You've known this shit was a lie for over 150 years. They've had to know that this is a lie for 150 years. And if you don't know, if you haven't came to that conclusion by now, then you shouldn't be practicing science. After that, you got a series of laws that this life form would have to go through. Mainly Mendel's laws of genetics. This is particularly looking at Mendel's laws of segregation, but the short and skinny of it, and not to get into too much of the scientific curriculum of it, explaining it and breaking it down. The deal is that we all have discrepancies in our own DNA. You know what I'm saying? My deficiencies are going to be different than somebody else's deficiencies that's not closely related to me. Somebody who's closely related to me, their deficiencies are going to be in something else. Some of us are born tall. Some of us are born short. Some of us can see a long ways. Some of us can't see that far at all. Some of us are faster. Some of us are slower. Some of us, we all have our different deficiencies. And so, when you get with your partner and stuff like that, they're going to have a different deficiency than you. The problem ends up being is if you, reproduce with people that are closely related to you, What you know who was right about this all along? Leviticus was right about this as they were going through and breaking down the chains of reproduction and marriage and whatnot in the Bible. Whenever they talk about this in Leviticus, you go ahead and God started separating the branches of, who you could marry and who you weren't allowed to marry. And the reason why is because everybody's DNA has discrepancy in it. It's got a deficiency of some sort in it. And whenever your partner is closely related, like a sister or a cousin, they're going to have the same kind of deficiencies that you do. And those deficiencies end up compounding. And this is how you get all sorts of kind of mental illnesses and diseases and handicaps and whatnot. So that's why it's not a great idea to reproduce with somebody that's generally in close relation to you. And so you can kind of understand a little bit why it just seems outrageous. It's not only that evolution and the Big Bang. It's not only just that they're just not practical or logical or without reason. They're just completely fucking unquantifiable. You can't even do the maths or the metrics to make any of the shit work. And basically, we can tell that it's more of a science fiction that's being taught to your kids in academia than it is actually any kind of real science. And we see the product coming out, the end product coming out of these institutions. This is one of the issues that we have as far as it pertains to the Department of Education. But this is exactly what I believe and how it all happened. So now I want to go ahead and get into what I believe in. And so this right here pretty much sums it up. I do believe that the Bible is probably a hell of a lot more accurate than anything that science has went ahead and decide to present as an alternative to civilization and academia. So God spoke and it was done. Just like it said in Psalms 33:9 here. So let's go ahead and get into it a little bit and see if it makes a little bit more sense than what we just went through on how the science community had to get to Earth. So we could see right here that God created the heavens and the earth on day one. Day two, he created the seas and the ocean and all the life and the firmament over the seas. There was, he pulled the earth out of the water and then under the water, as it says in the Bible, which means the firmament. And then, he separated the day and the night. Day three, he rose the earth out of the water on day three. And then you have all the wildlife, animals, creatures of the sea. And then ultimately, the sixth day, he created man. And on the seventh day, he rested. To me, this sounds a hell of a lot easier. It's more simple. And the reason why that this is probably the more, how could you say, this is the more coherent and rational and reasonable and sound explanation for how everything began, is because life almost had to start in a mature nature. It couldn't evolve. If anything, the reverse is happening. We got entropy. We already see entropy. Entropy is the sure fact that things over time go from a process of order to disorder. We notice this in time. Things get weaker, not stronger. Whenever you age, your body tends to deteriorate and whatnot. And this tends to be noticeable. We don't see anything evolving at all. So we ultimately have to know that this takes care of Mendel's laws of genetics, because whenever God created everything, he created it perfect, meaning that there was no discrepancy in the DNA. So you didn't have to worry about Mendel's laws of genetics. This also takes care of your biogenesis, because life already existed. God created life. God is the author of life. You don't have to go through any Big Bang. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to go through any of that. And in fact, the scientific community don't really want you to know that whenever they go ahead and try to go subatomic, they can't get any further down. They can get to a subatomic particle, but what they've come to notice is that the subatomic particle will sit there and collect itself to become a subatomic particle just to be observed. So, it's almost like vibrations, almost like God spoke and it was done. You know what I'm saying? Sound carries vibrations. And that's basically what they're trying to figure out at CERN. They're trying to figure out what the glue is that holds everything together, but they're never going to be able to find it. And they know they're not going to be able to find it because God is the author of life, and that's just how it works. It's every time the science looks harder and harder and tries to look for evidence to go ahead and disprove God, they end up proving him more and more. You know what I'm saying? So let's get into to what else I think happened. So ultimately, what you get, and this is an answer to Epicurus over there, that says, why does evil have to exist and whatnot? Ultimately, God created everything perfect. Basically, what essentially happened is that Adam and Eve decided that they were going to go ahead and eat from the tree of fruit of knowledge. You know what I said? Of good and evil. Well, now you have humanity that understands good and evil. You understand? So, I mean, up until this point, how would you understand death if there's never been any death? This is why it says in the Bible that, they tied themselves with fig leaves because they were naked and they felt ashamed. They had never felt shame before. But suddenly, humans feel shame. They have what we like to sit there and refer to as discernment, autonomy. They can sit there and make decisions. And this is ultimately what had happened. Whenever God saw this, and he saw fig leaves, he had asked them, and they said, they had basically told him that they had ate from the tree, right? So now they understood sin. But they didn't understand death, you know what I'm saying? And that's why God had to slaughter a lamb to make clothes for them. Is one, he had to cover their nakedness up because they were ashamed of their own nakedness. And two, because they didn't understand death. They had no clue of what death was. Remember, they had lived this whole time in the garden, and, they had not known death at this point in time. So there's no telling how long they had lived in the garden for, with peace among the animals. They had never seen what death was like. So ultimately, they were forbidden to go to the tree of life after that, and they were still in the garden. They still got to live in the garden, but they just couldn't go, the tree of life was protected from them from eternal life. So, they ultimately, they finally understood what death was. This is exactly the promise, and this is where you get the promise of Jesus Christ in the Bible, is because of that sacrifice of that lamb that had to die to cover up their nakedness. It's basically the whole gist of the Bible at this point in time, is that Jesus was sacrificed to cover us from our shame and our sin. So it's a very, very important story, and it ended up playing out later on. So, we'll go ahead and get further along into this a little bit. And this is why it explains a lot more without having to go through a whole fucking process of trying to get to Earth. You understand? It explains exactly where we're at as a society. It's just not saying, oh, well, it was created and that's good enough. That's not what God does. God goes on. So let's go ahead and see what happens next. So at some point in time, a man named Cain killed his brother Abel, right? Basically, he was jealous of Abel. I'm probably going to go ahead and do another video after this and going in depth and detail, because that is a very, very important story to understand where we're at today as a society. I can probably walk you all the way through that story and all the way through the events in history and what it says in the Bible and get where we're at today. But for all extensive purposes, Cain killed Abel, and then God banished him from the garden. Basically, he put a curse on Abel, says, the earth will never yield its fruit to you, and, you're going to walk around the earth as a vagabond. And he put a mark on Abel, and that mark was sin, basically. That's exactly what it was. A lot of people question about what the mark on Cain was. It's basically all the negative attributes of man. It's greed, it's envy, it's lust, it's rage, it's wrath, it's everything. All the negative traits were put in the mind of Cain whenever God put that mark on his head. Well, Cain would go out and form his own society. He would corrupt about, you know, because at this point in time, Adam came back to New Eve and they had their civilization going on. And Cain started out and he started building cities out there in the land of Nod and building up cities around the garden in Mesopotamia. Ultimately, you had Seth that was born. And so you would have a society in the Garden of Eden, and then you would have society outside in Mesopotamia, which was basically the descendants of Cain. The descendants of Cain degenerated, becoming more greedy, more corrupt, individuals. While the descendants of Seth, while they were living in the garden, they were probably healthier, bigger, stronger, more adept, more well, physically just better in shape because you're living in the Garden of Eden. Your accommodations are going to be better because all your stuff is provided from God, not each other, not from man. And so, at some point in time, some of the descendants of Seth decided, hey, you know what? These women over here in Mesopotamia, the descendants of Cain, well, they look fair to us. We're going to go ahead and take some for wives. And they started having children from them, which created great abominations in the earth, which, basically produced all this immorality of these, basically seeds of Seth were trying to go ahead and be like God. This is why, Cain in his heart, he thought he should be like God. He was entitled. You know what I'm saying? And in fact, whenever, you can refer to Lucifer and Cain, they're essentially the same person. They're the same being. They're the same spirit. They're the same identity. You understand? So, the society became more degenerate. It started to be more evil, more wicked, more vile, and it was an abomination. So God had no other choice but to go ahead and pull out Noah and his family and commission them to build an ark to go ahead and save so many. And mind you, that ark, whenever the scientists will sit there and say that's an impossibility. Okay, it's going to take about anywhere from 144,000 to 35,000 animals, right? Per which we know with that many, you can go ahead and do the logistics for yourself as it pertains to box carts. It only take about 231 to get that many animals on the ark if they're the size of a sheep. It's about 231, 236 train carts is what it would take. And the capacity for that damn ark would be able to hold 522 box carts. So there's more than enough room to go ahead and get every animal and the metrics and the species that they would need and the sheer numbers that they would need with room left over. Particularly whenever you're going to go ahead and consider that most of these animals were probably toddlers. You're not going to get a lion that's, in old age or something. You're going to get one that's younger. So it's going to be a little bit smaller than a full-grown lion. They're not going to be full-grown animals. So a lot of these are probably a lot smaller than a sheep. But the metrics for the ark meet the requirements, and it's probably ideal to go ahead and survive those rough waves and the inclement weather at that point in time. So, it's just one of those scientific foreknowledge things that comes along with the Bible, that you don't really have to sit there and say, oh, well, this is what I believe, and then have them sit there and point their fingers, because the stuff that they believe is way more ridiculous than anything that we believe. So what I believe happened, and this is what really caused the flood for the most part, is that, you had a tectonic shift. Now, all scientists will go ahead and claim that this is exactly what fucking happened. But this is what caused the landscape. Those mountains that you're talking about right there are not fucking billions and millions of years old. They're not that old. They're relatively, were formed relatively quick. and relatively at a high pace, and relatively recent compared to what you think that they were formed in. You know, and this is exactly what happened. What it says in the Bible is that water came from inside the earth and from the outside of the earth. So what I think happened was whenever that you had a great earthquakes that happened all over the earth, which basically set up our geography as we know it right now. And this created, geysers to go ahead and hit that you had geysers come up, and then they crushed into that firmament that God made. I believe it was a crystallized firmament, and I believe that this is exactly how the earth was set up. Because if you stop and think about it, what would happen if you had a ice firmament over the earth? It would protect the earth from harmful UV lights. It would go ahead and increase the oxygen supply, because if you didn't know that our oxygen, we're losing our oxygen um, on this planet. So the oxygen back then was a lot higher. I also believe that that's what ended up killing the dinosaurs, is suffocation. I believe that whenever the oxygen rate started to go ahead and drop, so did the dinosaurs. Slowly but surely, they couldn't survive because they needed a higher level of oxygen. So I believe that's exactly what happened. I believe that geysers came up, spewed 20 miles into the air, crashing against that ice crystallized firmament, melting most of it. That's what caused it to rain for so long. And then you had big ice chunks come down, particularly at the top at the North and South Poles, which went ahead and you had icebergs go ahead and break off, causing what you consider to be the fucking Ice Age. So all of this shit, the Jurassic Era and the Ice Age, all that stuff was happening at the same point in time. Ultimately, they couldn't sustain themselves. They probably froze pretty fucking instantly. So what I believe happened, and this is what really caused the flood for the most part, is that, you had a tectonic shift. Now, all scientists will go ahead and claim that this is exactly what fucking happened. But this is what caused the landscape. Those mountains that you're talking about right there are not fucking billions and millions of years old. They're not that old. They're relatively were formed relatively quick and relatively at a high pace, and relatively recent compared to what you think that they were formed in. you know and this is exactly what happened. What it says in the Bible is that water came from inside the earth and from the outside of the earth. So what I think happened was whenever that you had a great earthquakes that happened all over the earth, which basically set up our geography as we know it right now. And this created, geysers to go ahead and hit that you had geysers come up, and then they crushed into that firmament that God made. I believe it was a crystallized firmament, and I believe that this is exactly how the earth was set up. Because if you stop and think about it, what would happen if you had a ice firmament over the earth? It would protect the earth from harmful UV lights. It would go ahead and increase the oxygen supply, because if you didn't know that our oxygen, we're losing our oxygen um, on this planet. So the oxygen back then was a lot higher. I also believe that that's what ended up killing the dinosaurs, is suffocation. I believe that whenever the oxygen rate started to go ahead and drop, so did the dinosaurs. Slowly but surely, they couldn't survive because they needed a higher level of oxygen. So I believe that's exactly what happened. I believe that geysers came up, spewed 20 miles into the air, crashing against that ice crystallized firmament, melting most of it. That's what caused it to rain for so long. And then you had big ice chunks come down, particularly at the top at the North and South Poles, which went ahead and you had icebergs go ahead and break off, causing what you consider to be the fucking Ice Age. So all of this shit, the Jurassic Era and the Ice Age, All that stuff was happening at the same point in time. Ultimately, they could not sustain. They couldn't sustain themselves. They probably froze pretty fucking instantly. So ultimately, this is exactly why I'm kind of skeptical about the stuff that they deliver in academia. We already see the final product that these institutions are putting out. So, I mean, you got to really wonder why we go ahead and go through all these narratives to go ahead and convince people that God doesn't exist. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And it's certainly not beneficial to society. However, I plan on expanding on this a little bit. The Bible answers far more questions of how we got here. It has a lot of scientific foreknowledge. If you wanted to go and look that up in the Bible, scientific foreknowledge, it would probably help you quite a bit. You would be surprised and shocked how much the science, when the Bible gets it right and science has gotten it wrong. Ultimately, I will expand on this and go through the history now of society and how we've kind of dilapidated into this place where people are just reluctant to go ahead and invest in God and rely on their own abilities and whatnot. So anyways, y'all like this video. Y'all tell me what you think. Like, sub, do the shit the internet tells me to do to get over. And for now, I'm out.